Good morning, everybody. Welcome to today's event on pricing excellence. My name is Stephen Creaner. I'm the Executive Director with Enterprise Ireland with responsibility for the Industrial Division, the Food Division, and Research, Development and Innovation. I'm delighted to make the opening remarks on today's event as a key strategic initiative for CEOs. By way of that introduction, I'd just like to recap on what Enterprise Ireland's mandate is. Enterprise Ireland's mandate is to drive sustainable growth in Irish enterprise. To achieve this, we base our strategy around pillars like competitiveness, innovation, and international expansion. If we look at competitiveness and how we've approached it in the last number of years, we've fundamentally focused on two basic areas. One, the whole area of lean operations, and the second area was agile research and development. In the last 12 months, we've broadened out that particular focus to the wider perspective on innovation, and innovation in the broadest sense of the word, grounded in the Dublin model and the principles of ISO 56002. For those of you who know that approach, it effectively looks at innovation across organizational business models, product development, and customer experience, but not just on research and development and lean. Within the context of today's seminar, strategic pricing is both apposite and timely, as it reflects the principles of adding value and, quite frankly, pricing your product and service in the context of that value add. Today, we're going to hear about how achieving pricing excellence is also an innovation journey. From diagnosing what needs to change to introducing the processes and systems to enable that change. Pricing excellence will be a theme for Enterprise Ireland in the months and years ahead. Based on the overwhelming interest in today's event, we have certainly touched on a topic close to the hearts of CEOs and managers leading Ireland's response in terms of economic recovery to the pandemic. And the time is right to shine a spotlight on this strategic imperative, as pricing is probably the most powerful lever available to you to improve your profit margin. In Enterprise Ireland, we have witnessed the struggles and also the resilience of Irish companies grappling with both Brexit and COVID in the last number of years. These have both led to cost inflation, whether it's input costs like raw materials or the war for talent. They're all raising the cost of manufacture or the cost of service provision. All this at a time when it feels difficult to defend the current prices with customers, let alone introduce a price increase. Yet unless Irish companies can defend their pricing and command the price that reflects the true value of their products and solutions, they will struggle to build the profit margins necessary for resilience and growth. We are delighted that Mark Billige, the CEO of Simon-Kucher Partners, and members of his expert team are joining us today. Simon-Kucher are global leading specialists in revenue growth and considered the #1 consultants in strategic pricing. The richness of their experience over decades will be shared. We hope this and learning from the questions raised by you during the session and your peers will provide inspiration to take further action. Today is only the beginning of the journey. Our vision is to provide access to pricing knowledge and expertise and to build a community of like-minded company leaders sharing their experience in this particular competitive agenda. So with that short introduction, I'll hand you over to Deirdre McPartlin, the Enterprise Ireland Country Manager for the United Kingdom. Deirdre is our moderator for today, and I wish you every success in this new exciting initiative. Thank you, Deirdre.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And I join you in welcoming everybody to the event today. Just a little bit of background. Why did we choose to work with Simon-Kucher Partners? Well, we chose them as our partner on the topic, not alone because, as you said, Stephen, they are the world leading experts in pricing excellence, but also because of their heritage. And that heritage is rooted in working with family-owned and owner-led businesses, which is the characteristics of our own clients. Simon-Kucher Partners have also the lived experience of scaling their own company. And that scaling journey has seen them grow in countries that are considered to be the homelands of manufacturing excellence and services excellence and startup and scale-up excellence. So it's that experience which also matches our own client base that made them very relevant for today. So today there are two main parts. We're going to start with a presentation and case studies from Mark Billige, who is the CEO of Simon-Kucher Partners, and that will help us understand what pricing excellence means, essentially. And that will be followed then by a Q&A with Mark and two of his colleagues. So that is really your opportunity to have your questions answered. So just before we kick off, I'll show you on the control panel to the right of your screen. It's usually on the right. There's a place in that control panel for questions. And if you can't see the panel, it means you've minimized it. So the orange arrow will pull it out again. So do ask the questions, because your questions will inform our thinking on this topic and help us understand how to develop future events or what is most important to you. And if you don't have questions, use it for comments. So I think without further ado, what I would ask is now for Mark to pop on his camera and his microphone. And we can just organise that the slides should be there as well.
Yep.
Coming up any minute now. You have them in control. Mark, should I disappear and leave you to it? Fantastic.
Okay, brilliant. Well, Deirdre, thank you so much again for the lovely introduction. And it's great to be back talking with this group about this topic. Very excited about today. Amazing to see so many people turn out to join this. It's very humbling and yeah, really exciting. I think, I mean, Stephen's setup was perfect, talking about some of the pressures that we're all under as businesses in terms of cost inflation coming through, the need to not just innovate, but also to monetize those innovations as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through some of our thinking about this, set up a bit of a framework for how we like to think about pricing excellence. And then, as you said, introduce some of my colleagues to help with that. So I'm going to quickly do introductions on their behalf. Say, Deirdre already introduced me a little bit, the CEO of Simon-Kucher Partners. I've been with the company for 15 years, and nearly 20 years, I suppose, thinking about nothing but pricing and revenue topics. Also very lucky to have Pete Colman, a partner in the UK team as well, leads our industrials practice, also spends a lot of time with Irish clients, and also Phil, our business partner in Ireland, Phil was originally a client of ours, actually. We're very, very lucky to have Phil kind of switch sides now, supporting us in our development of our kind of Irish footprint. So there'll be the three of us on the panel later, but I'm going to jump straight in, try and set this up a bit. And the first thing I want to talk about is a very, very simple equation. I mean, Stephen already talked about what we're all here for, I think, and I hope, is sustainable profit growth. If we think about profit, actually, there's only a few things we can play with. I mean, of all the complicated things we do as organizations, it fundamentally boils down to three things, which is I have to manage my cost, and then I have volume, and I have price. And it's pretty simple, right? Price times volume minus cost is profit. And these are the only levers we can play with. We would argue that on the cost side, at least, most businesses for many years now have been thinking hard about cost. They've been thinking about things like Six Sigma. They've been thinking about reducing cost. They've been thinking about procurement. And a lot of work has been done there. On the volume side, I think we'll get talking about that, because most will say, well, this is somehow tied to the price question as well. But of course, work done on sales as well. But price is the one which is almost always the one which is not professionally optimized. To put that simply, most organizations I work with, if I say who's responsible for cost, I can get a list of 20 people from the finance and procurement team. I say who's responsible for volume, and I have the marketing and sales names. I say who's responsible for price, and people just look at each other, and no one's really sure, actually. And this is the problem, though, because actually, when it comes to where and how we make money, I guarantee you, whatever your P&L looks like, price is the strongest profit driver you have. I've taken a very simplistic, made-up P&L over here, We sell 100 units at €1 a piece. We have a 40-cent variable cost, means we have a variable cost of 40. Let's imagine we have 45 fixed costs. We have an operating income of 15 euros or 15%. Now, and now this is entirely theoretical, if we, for instance, could improve any one of those levers by 5%, what does that do? And just think through the simple mathematics of this. If I can improve my variable cost by 5%, that is to reduce that 40 down, I can improve my operating income by 13%. If I can take 5% out of my fixed cost, I can move that by 15%. Volume, of course, if I can improve my volume up by 5%, I get a 20% hit because, of course, I'm also increasing my variable cost as I go. The purest profit driver is, of course, price. Because if I put 5 on top of the price, it flows all the way through this P&L straight down onto operating income. So the 15 goes to 20, the 5 drops straight on top, a 33% increase in profitability for a 5% increase in price. And a lot of people don't think through those basic economics hard enough, because of course this thing also works in reverse. If I reduce my price by 5%, my income goes from 15 to 10, a 33% fall in my income. And how many times do we say yes to a 5% discount without even giving it a second thought? Now, I guarantee you, if someone starts saying, I want to put my costs up by 5%, we'll have a committee of people look at that for 3 weeks. 5% discount will get done without even thinking about it. But this could take a third of our profitability straight off the bat. And then if you think about it even more complicated, to get the volume back, to get where we need to, now I need to go from 10 to 15. I need a 50% increase in volume for that 5% price decrease. And I can tell you, having done this for 20 years, nothing will give you a 50% increase in volume for a 5% decrease in price. That just doesn't happen. So this is a very strong profit driver, but it's also a very dangerous profit killer if we don't understand this properly. So that's what we're going to talk about today: how to improve price, how to make it stick. I'm not going to be talking about 20, 30% price increases. I'm telling you, and I think the big takeaway should be for you, if you can look after the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5% of money that we just let flow out the door every day, this could have the biggest single impact on your bottom line. And so what we're talking about then is this concept of pricing power. Like I said, it's not about monopolistic pricing power. It's not about price gouging. It's not about abusing position. It's a very simple mantra. It's getting the price you deserve for the value you deliver. And so many of us are not well balanced on that equation. What we tend to find is actually many companies are fantastic at creating value. As Stephen talked about the innovation, huge amounts of effort go into engineering amazing products, thinking about quality, delivering them, following up, deep customer relationship management. This thing is thought about all the time and has huge investment in it. How companies then extract the counter value, i.e. get what they deserve, wow, companies mainly, they really struggle to quantify what value is. They tend to fall back on simple heuristics like what do our competitors charge, or what did it cost us to make? Very few think about the price model in terms of what am I actually charging for? Is it the unit itself or the usage of the unit? Too much focus on features instead of benefits. Very little thinking about how we talk about price and monitoring price. And a lot comes down to the real conflict at the heart of all of this, which is, yes, but if we push our prices, increase our profits, we might lose volume. And how do I deal with that? And so I tend to find, at least, that I would describe the creation of value as true science for most companies. And if I'm being generous, the extraction of value is normally guesswork or just simply not done. And the problem with that is that when I speak to companies, most want to raise their prices actually, but they struggle with that. Stephen also said something very pertinent, which is, like it or not, inflation is back, and it will be back for a while now. The cost of doing business will go up through things like Brexit or so. We have to completely reconfigure things after this pandemic. We talked about the war for talent. Inflation is back. And this is now some data from our global pricing study, which actually was just, this is pretty hot off the press. You must be one of the first groups to see this actually. And what we see every year or every few years, we track price realization. And you should think about that as if I would like to increase my price by 5% with a 50% realization, I would get 2.5% at the end of this. And we see over time that's been falling and falling. It's now down to about a third. And the big problem here is, so one, companies don't get what they are looking for. But actually, most companies, when you ask the follow-up question, they are only really trying to increase prices by inflation or less. So this means most companies are going backwards the whole time in terms of profitability. So when I ask my clients, why is this? Why aren't you able to get the price you deserve for the value they deliver? A lot talk about external factors. So you see on the left here, have you experienced higher price pressure? Always a majority, just under 60% say yes. Why is that? And it's always, and this year was exactly the same in the data, it's always two things. It's the competition. If only the competition weren't so stupid, we could increase our prices. And it's the customer. That, yeah, they are more and more powerful, and yeah, they ask us for lower prices consistently. And I have to say, these are reasons, but honestly, a lot of this is myth. And I'm going to show you that most of this is actually self-inflicted. Low price competition. A couple more data points from our study. I'm always told, I have a very price aggressive environment. I have to turn that question around and say, well, who exactly though is the aggressor? Let's think about this. On the left here, you see that when we ask, incredible, this number normally hovers around this number. 45 to 50% of the people we speak to believe they're involved in a price war. That is to say that there's a competitor or a number of competitors who consistently undercut each other to win the business. The most interesting question, though, of the study always is when we ask the follow-up question, okay, you're in a price war, but tell us, who started it? And here we find the problem. 3/4 always say it was the other guy. And it just can't be, obviously. We know that. It cannot be that everyone thinks we're in a price war, but yeah, 2/3, 3/4 always think it's the other person that started it. We have to recognize that our actions and our internal processes also lead to these outcomes. And actually, most price wars, when we study them, are unknowingly started by companies with poor pricing practices. That is to say that even if they have rate cards and discount escalations, that 5% discount I talked about is sometimes a 10 or a 20% discount. It's the actions of individual salespeople that cause these problems. And so actually it can't be that it's always the competitor's fault. We have to take some responsibility for the price integrity in the markets in which we operate. Secondly, the other one is it's our customers are too mean. They keep telling us we're too expensive. Well, I have to say to that, well, of course they do. That's the job of a customer. It's certainly the job of a procurement team. What you see on the left here is an exercise we quite often do with our clients, which is and you've got two sets of dots, some grey ones and some blue ones, but to think about how our proposition in multiple elements. It could be the service level, it could be product quality, it could be responsiveness, it could be delivery times, it could be price. And we ask them to tell us, well, how important are those factors in the buying process? And how do you think, versus competitors on that? And when we ask internally, we normally see this kind of picture where price is always number one. Our customers buy on price. They always tell us that's the most important thing. And they always tell us we're a bit more expensive, we're a bit worse than the rest. What's more interesting is when we ask the same question to the customers themselves. And then they always tell us a different story, which is, yeah, price is somewhere in the middle. Of course, we don't just buy on price. We're not stupid. Of course, we think about quality, and of course, we think about value. And actually, the price of your client, Mark, it's about the same as everybody else. So we far more often see that picture, and that disconnect is a huge thing. And it's this internal self-belief, which is almost always the biggest barrier to increasing prices. It's rarely the customer. A couple of quotes, these are quotes from a project, but they're very typical. When I speak to the sales team, yeah, we are commoditized. I can't tell you how many times I've been told, wow, we work in a commodity industry. We've lost power. When you speak to the customers, such a different story. And these are some actual extracts from interviews we did with our clients' customers. Since you give our client an 8 or 9 out of 10 for service, do you feel like you have to pay for that? No. And how easy is it to negotiate price down? Pretty easy. On this particular project, there was one quote that comes next, and I'll show you. And this was the one where the sales director pretty much exploded, actually, and it was the real catalyst to to make this thing happen. One of the customers described our client as a cheap date compared to competitors. And I have to say, these are very specific, but that theme, Pete and Phil will, I imagine, back me up on that, is a pretty typical theme that we hear repeatedly. Internally, we have one belief of ourselves: commodity at the behest of the customer. When you speak to the customer, it's always a different picture. So that's the reality, unfortunately, that those myths, that it's all about external factors that mean we can't manage price, are simply not true. The reality is pricing is simply not professionally managed. It doesn't have the resources, it doesn't have the focus. As I said at the top, I think an interesting question for all of us just to kind of ponder on while I speak is, who is responsible for this in my company? On cost and volume, you'll be able to tell me 10 names. On this one, my guess is some of you will go, I'm not so sure actually. And that's the huge miss here. If we professionally manage this, we can find 4 to 5%. I would say quite easily actually. That's not the hard money. 10, 20 gets harder, but that 4 or 5% is already game changing on the bottom line. So the reality is we need a system. The same way we approach cost in other parts of our business, we need a system for pricing. Part number one to that is we need a strategy. Do you have a price strategy? Could you write that down if I asked you to say, what is your pricing strategy? And I'm sorry, I don't accept the answer. It's what our competitors charge plus or minus 3%. That's not a strategy. That's some kind of benchmarking of price without actually any benchmarking of value. A strategy actually deals with trade-offs that you have to deal with in real life, which is to say, what do we do to push our margin? What do we accept in volume reduction to have margin increases? What is our pricing strategy in different segments? Some may be very price sensitive, some may be very price insensitive. How do I deal with those different dimensions? That's a price strategy. And many companies, most companies actually don't have one to start with. This is where the problem starts. Secondly, I need some kind of system. That is, I need to have a model to work out why my prices are what they are. And best practice will say I have two sides to the model, which is I need to build up to a list price by thinking about value, the value of the product and how different products have different value actually. So why would they have the same margin? So over cost, I increase my price point up to a list price. And then I have a discounting side to that that says, well, whilst different products, different regions have different value propositions, different customers actually should be rewarded in different ways because they behave in different ways. Some are good, some are loyal, some are bad, some are price buyers, and some are very fickle. So I then have a waterfall down to say, now this is an interesting concept, a target price. So knowing this product for this customer, what is a good price? And most companies don't have that kind of structure. They have something far more casual and less well thought out in the background. And it's one thing to have a target price. The next thing is to say, well, what is my real price? What do I end up getting? And there's always a gap. And this is down to implementation and enforcement. And it's really where the rubber meets the road, because this is where Excel stops and real life starts, and where a salesperson has a conversation with a customer. And so this is about empowering sales. It's about giving them guidance, maybe about thinking through their incentive scheme. I would be a very rich man if I got a pound for every time I've spoken to a CEO who says, we're all about profit. And I say, well, how does your incentive work? Well, actually, that's about revenue. And of course, the tension immediately falls over. So it's a bit about incentive, it's a bit about guidance. It's also a bit about skill and giving them the negotiating skills they need to keep this gap small. And then finally, we have to track this stuff. If we don't have KPIs for this, if we don't have measures for this, it won't happen. And again, I see too often that most businesses have a lot of KPIs and data around the cost and the volume side, and price far less so. It's a much murkier thing. They talk about average prices a lot, which isn't so helpful. So this framework, I think, is really important, and we can dig into that a bit in the Q&A. I just wanted to pick a couple of examples to bring this to life. What does this mean in real life? It's all very well to see the framework. So I start with strategy. Here's an example from a business services client of ours, and you can see from the left-hand side roughly the kind of business model they were in. And the starting point for this client was an interesting one, and it's a very common one. They were, I would describe them as a premium player. Very, very great service level, super product, happy clients. The problem is they keep saying we keep getting attacked by low-cost competitors, and we lose business because low-cost competitors turn up almost half our price sometimes. And so what we end up doing is we end up discounting to keep the business. And the problem with that is that, so very simply, they have a gold-plated product and they keep selling it at bronze-level prices. So we said to them, well, why not have 3 versions of the same offer? Why not have the gold product, which does have the price point, but why not create a bronze product? Or I wouldn't call it product, a bronze offer, which actually is far more comparable to the competitors that you're struggling with, and with a price which is more comparable to their level. And now when you talk to your customer, now you can force the trade-off to say, listen, if you do want that kind of price point, we do have an offer for you, but you don't get everything. That's a trade-off, it's value and price. But actually, now I have a perfect upsell ramp to say, but for spending a little bit more, I can get you back up to the level of service which I think you deserve. It seems very simple on the page, but I think very important to say that this is pure, real strategy work to think about not just what is my price, but what is it that I'm pricing? What is my offer? And why would I have one when I'm dealing with different segments and different competitive issues? So developing packages, thinking through a pricing strategy for different segments and different competitive situations, I think is very important. The second one, price setting. I think where most people get to when they think about pricing is, how do I actually set my product price? And the reality is cost plus pricing still dominates. A lot of businesses talk about value-based pricing, but really it's cost plus but dressed up. And here's some data from a project of ours, and I think this tells the story very simply. But what we did was we just broke their products down into 3 buckets, which is highly differentiated, pretty kind of what I call average, and actually quite commodity, low differentiation. And you see, most sits in the middle. The most interesting data is when we looked at the gross margin. And these guys said, I have a pricing system. Yeah, that system's pretty simple, right? It's operated at a 60% gross margin, give or take some discount here or there. And so we asked them, but if these are different to these kind of products, these are highly specialist, why would you have the same margin? That makes no sense. That's a purely cost plus outcome. So what we did with them, this was in the building materials industry, we created a product segmentation, and we chopped their products up into buckets. And we said, well, some of them are actually relatively commodity and they're high turnover, so we should have a lower margin expectation for these. But some are small volume, super specialty. They should have a much higher margin. And the way we worked this was actually some went down, some went up, but overall we found about 4 percentage points of margin purely at the list price level by disaggregating margins. And of course we found there was very little pushback from customers on the higher prices and the higher margins over here. And actually they're even more competitive on some of this over here, which drove their volume. So we deal with this trade-off of volume and margin within the framework. On price setting, I talked about the build up, and I also talked about the build down. And I always feel a bit unfair that I beat up on salespeople in these kind of talks, but in most companies, they outsource pricing to sales, and they say, you can work it out, we trust your judgment, which is fine to a degree. This is an industrial goods business, very typical, that we found they kind of had a net price of 92 versus the list price of 100. And actually, there were some services on top. 12 percentage points were with discounting. And when we asked on what basis, I mean, there is none. It's actually purely discretion. Any salesperson, that's the average. I mean, some of this in this client went down to 30, 40%, some obviously was far less. But that's what's at play for some salespeople, which is just huge. It's almost all the profit at play in this case. And there is very little guidance or structure here. So what we said was, listen, discounting is not bad. Of course, discounting makes sense, but we should have a rationale for why we discount. So we put in place a more structured, and we called it a reward mechanism, which is to say a discount should always be a quid pro quo. I give you a discount because ... you give me more volume. So we have a volume discount. I give you a discount because you have a good product mix, i.e. you don't just take pure commodity, you also take some of the high margin mix. Because there is a competitive situation, I put some of it out of discount into rebate, so you only get that when I see the behavior. So trying to link discounts to real customer behaviors to reward the behaviors you would like, and use this as a steering mechanism for our customers to say, listen, if you want more discount, these are the things you have to do. Of course, we also played with this so that the overall discount level was ever so slightly lower. And again, there's those 2 percentage points I talked about. Final one, talking a bit about price implementation. I mentioned this already. Revenue-based compensation is all very well, but if we're actually getting serious about driving our profitability and about pricing, it probably isn't going to help us get to where we need to get to. We see this all the time, which is when we ask a client, could you give me the list of your top salespeople? They always come back with a ranking based on volume, and this is the salesperson mentality. I sell a lot, therefore I am good. And it tends to be that in this case, the Josh, the Daniels, the Esthers, these are the kind of the sales heroes. Martin, Kirsty, and Steve, yeah, probably are a bit of a lost cause. But the group in the middle, I find a really interesting one, because it's when we recut this performance by profit that we find a really different picture. And maybe Josh is very good in Esther, but actually Daniel, he's not so helpful. He's selling an awful lot, but obviously at very low margin. So he probably has actually a relatively easy life. The one I find interesting is Paul down here. Poor old Paul is probably thinking about finding a new job at some point. He certainly feels like he is massively undervalued in the sales team. He probably questions the whole time, what are my colleagues doing? All these guys that are selling all this volume at no money, are they crazy? I work really hard. I sell less, but I deliver a good chunk of the profitability for this business. So thinking through how we incentivize, how we tie the performance of our salespeople to profit or pricing, this is the real kind of supercharge we need to make this kind of thing happen. And without this, it gets very sticky and very tricky to really change those behaviors. So that's what pricing excellence looks like. A lot of internal myths, I think, that need busting open, and then a clear framework to execute to really take advantage of this. Typically, what this looks like is, in our experience, is kind of normally 3 steps, which is step 1 is working out where the issues are, and importantly, putting some priority. As I talked about, it could be strategy, it could be price setting on the value side, it could be discounting, it could be incentives, it could be controlling. We need to know where the pain points are and where the opportunity sits. So some quick prioritization, we throw the net really wide, we find out where the wins are, then we turn that into real life. Let's build the pricing logic, let's build the discounting system, let's build a new incentive scheme. What does that look like? Make the blueprint, and then it's about rolling this out and making this business as usual, from project to standard, so that all salespeople, all marketing people, all finance people work from the same hymn sheet. That is a very typical process. Could take longer or shorter depending on the number of opportunities, the complexity of the business. But with that, I'm gonna stop there actually, and I'm gonna introduce Pete and Phil to dig in to your questions that you may have on this whole thing. As I say, in summary, I think this is, for most businesses, by far the biggest opportunity to drive bottom line growth. It is not about doubling prices. It's about finding 2 to 4% by taking a systematic view, as systematic as you would to the cost base, into pricing. It's not impossible. It takes a bit of effort, but we can all get there. So, Deirdre, that was, for what it's worth, my views on pricing excellence, where it goes wrong and how it can be done better. I think now, I don't know if we have some questions, but I think it'd be great to hear what people think about that, and what they want to know.
Fantastic. So while Pete and Phil are joining us and switching on their microphones and their cameras, I'd like to thank you very much for that, Mark. Lots of questions about whether people can receive the slides afterwards. At the very end, I should have mentioned in the wrap-up, we'll explain and give you an email address if you want to get the slides, but everyone will automatically get a recording of the event. But you're very welcome, Peter and Phil.
Thank you.
And as questions are coming in, and Mark, you can prepare, there's a ton of questions coming in around new products, or you're the first to the market, so there'll be some coming your way. But before we get to them, really by way of introduction, Peter and Phil, I'll start with you, Phil. You have been speaking to company leaders in Ireland on a daily basis. What are their main concerns, and does it vary by sector?
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for being with us today. Deirdre, apart from Brexit and the pandemic and its impact on growth and profitability, and in some cases, unfortunately, around survival. I think the main concerns that MDs and CEOs are sharing with me are really concerns around recovery of raw material, packaging, and logistic cost increases. Mark spoke about inflation being back and here and ever present. They're also experiencing constraints, serious constraints around supply chain. So these are I would say, the hot topics of today in my experience. They are also concerned, I would say, around their own internal capability in price management, especially when they have understood and realized that pricing, as Mark pointed out to us, is the single biggest profit lever for any company, irrespective of their size or their sector. Pricing affects everything. So I would say that the concerns have been heightened in the past 6 months, especially with pricing and shortages of raw materials and these supply constraints. I spoke with one MD last week. He's in a timber business, so manufacturing and distribution. He's experiencing cost increases of roughly around about 8% per quarter. He's never seen anything like this in his career over 30 odd years. And quite frankly, you know, we know that his entire profitability will be eroded in 4 quarters if not professionally addressed and optimized, as Mark pointed out earlier on. He also, I would say, would accept that he has underinvested in and under-resourced around pricing. And he wants to know, they want to know, the company wants to know how to address that as a strategic imperative. I mean, the concerns that they have around that are, where will they start, what to do, importantly, how, and then when to do it. And of course, what is the business case around that? And that's clearly the reason that we're talking to them. I think also what we're seeing is that many companies have heavily invested in their e-commerce capability with digital acceleration during the pandemic. And this is bringing new challenges with price transparency across multiple channels. So that's something they're having to deal with. For tech companies, it's completely different. Those that I've spoken to, they're focused on growth, price for their product offering, what's in the package, strategies for customer acquisition and retention. So it does vary by sector, and can also vary by, in my experience, can vary by company within sector. I think also that's why we are set up in Simon-Kucher. We're organized in specialists with specialists in each sector. So manufacturing and logistics, life sciences, tech and software, consumer and retail, etc., etc. So yes, it does vary by sector.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And a second question, I can see the questions are piling in, but so maybe you might address this briefly. Mark mentioned that you were MD of a business and that you sponsored a pricing project from start to implementation. So what prompted you to start? What were the main challenges and what were the results?
Well, I suppose that's where my journey started on pricing. It started with a very uncomfortable conversation with our chairman at the time on our own internal pricing maturity. He pointed out to me and the rest of our management team that our business was around about 4 margin points behind our nearest and biggest competitors. It was hard to explain from my point of view. It was also very hard to defend. He had and we had access to our competitors' published accounts, so there was no denying it. And I think internally we considered ourselves to be really good around pricing. We had, business analysts in some of the subsidiaries looking at pricing and supporting the business. But frankly, we really thought that no one could help or teach us, in inverted commas, about pricing methodology and processes for our own products in our own markets. We didn't think that was possible, but we were wrong. So we engaged with Simon-Kucher to help us on the pricing journey. Peter, in fact, was the partner on the project, and that's how we actually met one another, Pete, if you remember. Never forgets, as you. And now we're working together. So the challenges we faced were mainly around change management, in my opinion. There is an understandable internal bias and resistance to tackling pricing, and I was party to that resistance. and that bias. Pricing is not easy, but it is about people, it's about processes, and it's about leadership. So we ran initially four pilots across 4 different regions, different markets, different products, and different competitors. And we captured, to get to what were the results, we captured 3.5 points of margin with a payback for the project in less than 6 months. You know, a business that was previously a 10% return on sales business became a 13.5% return on sales business, and that continued to improve every year. And one of the things, we were really good in safety across the organization. After a 10-year focus on safety, we went from 365 roughly incidents in safety issues, accidents in the business globally, and we brought that down to less than 10 a year, and that was about focus. And we put the same focus into pricing, and we got the results.
Thanks, Phil, for sharing that, and your honesty in being a laggard or something similar, I think you used in the language. But Pete, you've seen lots of different types of businesses, and the challenges that Phil mentioned, are they unusual? Do you see them frequently?
Yeah, so the challenges are pretty common. They will vary a bit by revenue models. So, for example, you know, if we were to look at a company that was a manufacturer, it could easily be that they're pricing products, and therefore the challenges are how they set their list prices and how they do the discounting. You know, if you looked at a tech business, it could be how they set up their subscription and their packaging. If it's an engineering services business, it could be, you know, how do they approach tenders? You know, they get one shot basically to either win the deal or not. So the nuances of the business will be different, and that provides different challenges. But if you sort of take it up a level and say, what are the overarching challenges? They're pretty common. You know, the first one is, does the business understand value? The second one is, does someone own this? Who owns the pricing? And the third one is really about, you know, making your decisions based off data, making them based off facts. So you know, Phil mentioned the project that I worked with him. You know, he won't mind me telling you this, but the first proper meeting that we had with Phil actually in the project, we diagnosed what was going on, and we showed some analyses back to him and his team, and they said that cannot be right. It cannot be right. You need to go away and you need to check that, because that cannot happen. And we went away, we checked through everything, and actually it was right. And what had happened was the policy should have prevented this. But actually what was happening, we could see in the data that the policy wasn't being enacted. And the problem for businesses is they tend to operate in averages. You know, your budget is on an average per month, etc. And when you do pricing, you need to be a bit more forensic than that. You need to be looking at what are the outliers, what are the exception cases, what are the really good prices that we got, and why did we get those, and what are the really bad prices, and why did those happen? So that was the first bit, looking at that data. The ownership bit, I'll reiterate what Mark said. I had one client who brought me in, and we asked across the business who owns pricing. Sales told us it was finance and marketing. Marketing said it was finance, and finance said it was mainly sales and a bit of them. The reality is no one was really in control of it. And then the third bit, I think, is that value, and this is probably the most important bit. I remember an example of a client where there were 10 things that they would have believed no matter what. You couldn't persuade them against it. We called them sort of golden truths, basically. And we surveyed their customer base, and actually they were spot on 5 of them. But 5 of them weren't actually that true. So, for example, they thought they were really expensive, and actually they weren't. They were about the same as others. They thought they were poor value for money. Actually, they were excellent value for money, because their service was so much better than everybody else's. So when we replayed this, we listed out the 10 truths, and we said to them, 5 of these are true. You need to guess which. We played a little game, and we went through, and it was a fun meeting. But at the end of that, it had 2 effects. One was we knew we had headroom in pricing, which was the chosen sort of effect. The second one was the MD said, "Can I take your slides?" And he actually called an all-hands meeting, and he said, "Look, we've talked about this stuff till we're blue in the face. We all believe this. Let me tell you what our customers are actually telling us." And he ran through, and that understanding about why customers buy from you, why they value aspects of your service, that one's rarely done to the level that it should, and that's the foundation. If you don't understand the value, you can't charge the corresponding value, so you don't get the price.
So with all of the richness there of all of the companies and the different scenarios, if you were giving, you know, CEOs and leaders on the call today just one piece of advice, one action, what would that be?
Yeah, this is one I think is actually you can do pretty quickly. It doesn't solve everything, but the biggest problem is it's not an agenda item anywhere. You need to have on your standard board pack, there's going to be a section to discuss pricing, nothing else. It's normally covered in some side conversations and talk about revenue and other things. Just dedicate some time to talk about this. I mean, there's a whole host of things to then actually improve it, but set aside some time. If you do a management retreat, or you're doing an away day when you get your teams together, make sure it's a dedicated item on that agenda. It's very simple to do. It'll start the conversation. It's not going to fix everything, but it means it's there on a recurring basis. It's not going to get forgotten.
Great. So if I look at some of the questions that have come in, and if we don't get through all of these, you guys have committed that you'll bundle them into frequently asked questions, and we can share the answers. But if I kick off with a common theme, Mark, you can decide if this is for you or for somebody else, is, you know, how to price a solution if you are first to the space. So this has come in various ways, new product development, or I'm, you know, deep tech or whatever, but how do you price something if you're first to the space?
Yeah, so maybe I'll give a first attempt, and then Pete or Phil, please feel free to kind of add on. But the principles of first the space or last the space are the same, right? And this actually the question highlights how most people do their pricing, which is they look at a competitor and charge something relevant to the competitor or relative to the competitor. And if you're first, you don't have that benchmark, right? So and that is the wrong benchmark. The benchmark is the value. So the first thing you have to do is start to understand the value proposition and understand not just what does my product do, but what is the value it creates. And most things you can say, actually, they lead to some kind of outcome for the client. They save them some money, they help them do something quicker or faster. So I would start there. Start thinking about what would a simple economics look like of my product. If I can help you save you 10% of your cost base, then already I have a kind of a ceiling to my price, which is you wouldn't pay me more than that to save that money. So I can start to set the ceiling. I would ignore my cost unless all my maths comes back and says the price has to be lower than my cost. Then I know I've got a really bad business and a bad product, and I would can it. But I would start by thinking about that, and I would speak to some customers. This idea that I'm first, so there's no competitor, what do we do? You've got to go out and ask the customers, understand how they're going to use it, understand where the value comes from, and start from there. And then actually everything else holds. All those truisms about that I talked about, the framework, the value up, the discount down, they all hold. But it's that start with the value, not with a competitor.
Okay. Anything you wanted to add to that, Pete or Phil?
Yeah, I think there's one thing as well, which is start to understand the pricing very early in the development cycle. When most, certainly in manufacturing, when most companies will sort of really focus on it is when a lot of the product is already designed and the cost is already included. And by that stage, it's too late. You want to be refining the price at that stage, but you want to understand as part of your initial research when you're developing the concept, what's the range that we're operating in here? Because until you do that, you've got no real pressure on production either. And if you're not careful, you just make this wonderfully over-engineered product that can do everything, but no customer's willing to pay. And we see this in the stats. Something like 72% of all new product introductions fail to hit their profit targets. Now, that doesn't mean they're lousy products, but it means they're not a commercial success.
Okay. A question that goes into more the negotiation side. And so the way the questioner phrases this is, I realize this question is more about negotiation than pricing strategy, but in the real world, customers get emotional when it comes to being able to negotiate a discount. How would you handle this without a pricing strategy? Maybe Peter, we start with on that one.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. What do we find when it comes to negotiations? It's rare that a company has mapped out their actual ideal process for the negotiations, right? Which basically says, here are the steps that we would like you to go through. Firstly, which things are we going to bid on and which things aren't we going to bid on? Yeah, let's shoot the healthy animals, not the unhealthy ones first. So there'll be some things that we just don't want to touch. Normally, people bid everything. Second thing is, what are we bidding against? Have we got any ability to alter that? Is there a specification? Is our strategy for that deal to meet the specification, to be more than the specification, or to be under the specification? So it's a little bit like Mark's example of that gold, silver, bronze. Are we pitching silver, or are we pitching gold, or are we pitching bronze? And then the third part is, have we prepped out? Have we rehearsed? Have we got our arguments laid out? Do we know what the common pushbacks are? Have we done an exercise to try and work out our balance of power? Are we the incumbent and we're getting asked to retender versus we're trying to break into a new account? And what we typically find is most of the conversations around negotiation talk about the actual what happens in the room. There's probably 80% of the effort should be planned up front. Mark and I did a project. We actually asked global key account managers how much time they prepared for deals that were worth generally between £500,000 and a couple of £1 million. And the VP of sales was astonished because it was measured in minutes, not days. So that preparation up front is really, really important. Rehearse it. Yeah, make sure you know where your walkaway point is. Actually have a walkaway point. Know whether you're going through 2, 3, 4 rounds of reductions. Plan out what concessions you're going to make, etc. If you do the preparation right, the salespeople will have confidence and they'll know that the management team have got their back.
Okay. And there's a follow-on question maybe there, which is, how do you approach price increases with current customers?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. And again, maybe this is one that's quite counterintuitive. Typically, when people look at price increases, they look at who's got the cheapest prices and how can we increase those. We actually often find that people who are paying the highest prices are the ones that see the most value, and so consequently, they're the ones that you should be thinking about, an ease of use, an ease of increase potentially. The same principle goes to this, which is, have you planned out the negotiation? Have you worked out how much a particular customer, say you're in a service business, how much are they using the service? Can you work out how much benefit they've got from it? And have you prepared a very client-specific set of argumentation as to why those prices need to go up? So
I would just
say
have one
principles.
Yeah, maybe I'll just have one comment on that, the price increase piece. And I have to say, Deirdre, I think it's a very important question. I mean, it talks a lot about some of these themes about recovering inflation, etc. every company needs a price increase process, and most companies don't have one. They have processes for all sorts of things, but they don't have a mapped out price increase process. As Pete says, it is a system. I think, Phil, you said that as well. It's about a system for these things, which is, and the biggest mistake on price increases is the blanket 3% for everybody. Always fails. It's about doing the segmentation in 2 dimensions, which is across my customers, like Pete said, not just looking at what they pay today, but looking at who gets the value, and sometimes get the salespeople to score the customer base, and you get an interesting insight. The other is across the products, to say, here are some products which are super niche, they can't get them anywhere else, so let's put more on those. Here are some that are really commodity. So I have different prices for different products from different customers. And then, like Pete says, you have to just prepare. Don't let people have a go, prepare it well.
And there's another question here that kind of takes that existing customer from a different angle, and it's addressed to you, Mark, and there's compliments to the panel on the content so far. But how would you overcome the challenge of ensuring the perceived value of your service is realised? And in this instance, they're saying customers are paying for a subscription service, but not using it to its full extent, which then puts price pressure at renewal.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, it's a perfect example, Deirdre. I mean, again, Pete, Phil, and everyone will know these examples. We've worked them so many times. I'll give you one of the ones Pete and I worked on, data services business, where subscription to OT data, massive price increase program. Actually, that was a really big one. We got, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Pete, 10 to 15% average price increases in this business. There were some customers that got no price increase because they had a subscription something and they never used it. So that is what my point, which is, first things first, let's understand who values the product. And if I have data like usage, it's a great indicator. Of course, the more interesting question next is why aren't they using it? And that then comes back down to the gold, silver, bronze thing. Have they got the wrong product, actually? Have they got a bunch of features they're never going to use? And could I find them something that fits better? Or is it actually a customer success question, an engagement question, which is we've just never taught them or shown them how to use the product? So multiple answers there, but number one, let's not make those the target of our price increase campaign on day one. Let's make them the target of a value increase campaign, which is to do with user engagement, it's to do with onboarding, it's to do with education, it's to do with having honest conversations about the product.
Okay, this is going to be the last question from the questions coming in, okay? And I'm going to address it to you, Pete, now in a second. But do stay on if you're in the audience, because I'm going to give you some advice. Some of the other questions that are coming in, I'm going to be able to point you in the direction where to get some of the answers. And I'm also going to tell you how we build that community that Stephen said. I mean, together, we've got something exciting that we're planning with Simon-Kucher that I want to share. But last question from the questions coming in. So certain markets accept higher prices. However, as we grow global accounts, it becomes a huge issue when our dealer in a higher price market sees the lower pricing in a global client. So current fluctuation also feeds into this. Any suggestions how to handle this? So Peter, addressing to you because it's coming from one of our industrial clients.
Yeah, we've certainly seen this a number of times. What we're typically recommending in these types of situations is working out on some price corridors. In other words, trying to make sure that within a particular region, the price fluctuations are within a certain margin of each other, and therefore you don't get this, well, you know, if I just nip over the border from, you know, France into Spain, I can get a better deal. So that's the usual way of working out. It means rather than optimizing each individual country, you have to optimize the system a little bit. There'll be some that would ideally want to be able to go a bit cheaper, but for the good of the whole, you introduce some limits. Now, when Mark said what's the price strategy at the start, that's where you need a price strategy. Yeah, what are those limits? Where do you think there's extra volume? Where is the margin? If you just leave it to the countries, they'll do what's in their own best interest, I'm sure. So at some point, that management responsibility needs to provide the overlay.
Okay. Thank you all so much. It is 12 o'clock, so we promised we'd finish at 12. So hang in for just a few minutes, audience. I can see from the questions that you guys were really appreciated, so thank you. And as I mentioned, firstly, everyone who took part today will get a recording of the event. When the guys on the panel have had a chance to review the questions, they'll compile an FAQ using other colleagues, whoever the best source of information. We'll send that on later. But to start beginning the community of leaders around pricing excellence, we have just agreed with our colleagues, our partners here in Simon-Kucher, a benchmarking project as a way to kick things off. So Simon-Kucher Partners conduct a biannual study. That's the global pricing study, and Mark shared some of the results and themes in the presentation. They've agreed to run that study with Enterprise Ireland clients, and this will give us a good picture of how we compare with companies in other parts of the world who are taking pricing seriously, who want to address it. And when we have that benchmark comparison, we'll organise another event. We'll pick up the themes that you're bringing through and asking us to address, and we'll address both of those together in a future event. So, but I'd also encourage you to spend some time on Simon-Kucher's website. So alongside white papers and upcoming events, there's a number of past webinars that can be accessed on demand. So one that I think everyone will love is 5 ways to successfully negotiate higher prices. There's a lot around pricing agility in COVID, and boy, that's relevant now as well. You know, as companies are seeing their input prices go through the roof, how do you agilely adapt your pricing and pass it on to the customer as fast as you can? There's a Nordics Breakfast Club that looks at servitization. There's specific ones around SaaS products and how to price SaaS products. So lots of things, both general and sector specific. So I really encourage the leaders on the call, when you're putting some time aside, your thinking time, have a look at some of the content on the website. They'll stimulate ideas or give you pause to reflect. And then finally, and Jill, if you want to pull up our last slide there, it's just our holding slide. If the UK is a priority market for you, we have our own Enterprise Ireland Evolve UK programme of webinars and reports that provide both sector and market insights. And we use independent market experts looking at the drivers of change here in the UK. So picking up on post-Brexit, post-COVID, climate action and other themes. Jill has very kindly given her email address, but you'll find me, and the format is the same, Deirdre.McPartlin at enterprise-ireland.com. Jill or I will direct you to the sector experts in our London or Manchester offices if you need any further assistance in the UK. A number of our DAs and other EI colleagues have joined the call to us, or the event today. And as you know, if you're our client, your DA is your greatest advocate and champion. As Stephen mentioned, they're going to be interested in your views, so get in touch. And with that, I'm going to wrap up. You can follow anything that we're going to be doing on pricing. We'll certainly have it on our LinkedIn page, our Enterprise Ireland UK LinkedIn page. So sign up to that. But to conclude the event, thank you once again to our panelists. Some excitement that we're building a community and some energy around this topic. And to everybody, wishing you all the best and every success in your journey to pricing excellence. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.